What do you think when people make pronunciation or grammar mistakes, even when native speakers make them? This is something that a lot of non-native speakers are curious to know about, because oftentimes, as I said, and I experienced that, sometimes people feel stupid when they make mistakes.
Yeah, and that's a feeling that we tend to have more so when we learn a language as an adult as well, because we're already like have this standard of how we know we communicate in our native language, and we want it to just happen flawlessly the first time in our non-native language, but that's not a realistic goal. So pronunciation and grammar mistakes are going to happen. Like no matter how advanced you get, there will always be like a moment where you just say a word differently and you're like, oh, why did it come out like that? Or you say a grammar or something and you're like, oh, why did that happen? Or we might not even realize the mistake, and that's okay. So the first thing I sort of, when people ask me this question, I rebound the question to them first. And I think, okay, if we're speaking in your native language, what are you going to think about me if we're having this conversation in your language and I make a pronunciation or grammar mistake? What would you tell me? And they're like, I wouldn't care. Like, it's like, if I know what you're saying, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, exactly. So it's a mistake just like any other. If your response to that question is you would think someone is stupid or unintelligent or whatever, then you should probably reanalyze how you perceive people in language. That would be my first, your first blockage in perceiving yourself better in your non-native language. But people make typos when they're writing all the time, or people misspeak. I make grammar mistakes when I speak all the time, because you change an idea or how you want to say something, and instead of putting an adjective, you put a noun, or you say a verb a different way, and no one cares, and you just keep going. So when you do that in your non-native language, it's fine too. And if we fear making mistakes and we allow that sense of perfectionism, because we can get really trapped in that sense of perfectionism as non-native speakers, we won't ever move forward. You're never going to find areas or ways of improving or experiences where you can learn and grow. Because when pronunciation and grammar mistakes are major and they actually impede us from understanding the message that you're trying to share, that can cause confusion. But in that, the worst case scenario is someone would say they're confused about what you're saying, or they would ask you to clarify. So you'd realize your error, you would clarify, and you'd move on. And it wouldn't be like a big deal. Like that's the worst case scenario. Which when you think about it, you're like, okay, that's not really that bad. They just ask and I respond and we move on with the conversation. So as long as we choose to learn from our mistakes and, remember them and have them mean something. Like if you keep making the same mistake over and over, it's because you're not learning from it. You're not really analyzing those situations. But if you're learning from them, there's no need to fear those experiences, because they're actually opportunities to find where you can improve and focus on for moving forward. So they're like little blessings in disguise, in my opinion, making mistakes, because they show us where we can keep improving our own communication style.
This is the question that concerns most people who are learning languages. Is making mistakes okay? Do native speakers think we're stupid when we're making grammar or pronunciation mistakes?
Oh, no. There's a huge difference between being actually stupid and just not knowing something. That's an inexperienced, I guess, is the word. No, of course not. It is interesting to think, though, an adult who's 30 years old or 40 is limited by the language he knows. So when it comes to explaining concepts, his language is simple, almost like perhaps a child in a native speech. But no, of course, that's not being stupid. So do it as much as you can, and every time you do that, you'll find from that you learn something new, a new word, a new phrase, and it'll come up. Wow, 2 days later, you need it again, then again. That's how it snowballs, really.
Yeah, that's true. I've heard it so many times.